In keeping with our communion service, we read, "How blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. How blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. When I kept silent about my sin, my body wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My vitality was drained away as with the fever heat of summer. I acknowledged my sin to you, and my iniquity I did not hide. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Therefore let everyone who is godly pray to you in a time when you may be found. Surely in a flood of great waters they will not reach him. You are my hiding place. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with songs of deliverance. I will instruct you and teach you in the way which you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. Do not be as the horse or as the mule, which have no understanding, whose trappings include bit and bridle to hold them in place. Otherwise, they will not come near you. Many are the sorrows of the wicked, but he who trusts in the Lord, loving kindness shall surround him. Be glad in the Lord and rejoice, you righteous ones, and shout for joy, all of you who are upright in heart." If we were to put this in the 21st century, we would be looking at a script that went something like this. There was David, who sat in a TV studio talking with God. And there were all of these people sitting in the audience, and the television was being broadcast throughout the United States. The topic of the subject for the day was my sins against God and my people. How would you like that? Here we have the life of a man who's been dead for centuries, and still we have the record of how he talked about some of the darkest moments of his life, a darkness that he has brought on himself. And yet we can see that there is a sense of triumph. And it reminds us that the Bible teaches us that proper conduct, which is an ongoing expression of faith, results in God-given happiness. But the question that we would see here is put this way: is there any happiness for those who have lapsed in their walk of faith? And this is what we see at issue. We see David, who went out upon his rooftop one evening, saw a woman, lusted, committed adultery with her. She became pregnant. He tried to hide it. Her husband was a loyal soldier to the king, to the country, and he put that soldier in a place where he knew that he would be killed to cover his own sin. This is what we're talking about. And I have referred to this passage many times as the heavy hand of grace. Oftentimes we look at the grace of God as being uplifting and just lightens the load and all of that, and we are not wrong by saying so. But we need to keep in mind that there is also the heavy hand of grace. And this is what we see here. So we put the question again: is there any happiness for those who have lapsed in their walk of faith? And the answer is a resounding yes. Notice the opening statement: how blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered, and how blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity. Notice the term blessed. It means being in a state of well-being. It includes some happiness. It includes a life that seems to be acceptable to the one who lives it. But this is the blessing of forgiveness. This is the maskil, where he pauses and gives some reflection to what he has done and what has happened in his life. And notice that he comes out that the blessing is predicated and based upon the transgression that has been forgiven and the sin that has been covered. And when we read these verses, he speaks of the transgression is forgiven. The transgression which includes rebellion. The sin, which means to fall short of the standards of God. And the iniquity, which means guilt. He speaks of being forgiven of his sins, but he tells us exactly what is involved. On his part, there was rebellion against God. On his part, there was a rebellion against the standards by which he knew that he was to live as one of the part of the people of Israel. And the iniquity entails guilt. Notice that he says as well, or what is written down, I will instruct you and teach you in the way which you should go, and I will counsel you with my eye upon you. The blessing of a renewed relationship with God. It includes God's promise of continued guidance. It includes God's promise of his care. And this is what we need to keep in mind as well. I would suspect that there might be somebody here, or there is some of us here who know of people whose lives have had a tremendous break from the faith, and they still wrestle with it, and they still feel a tremendous burden. And we need to be there to remind them that the forgiveness of God should bring blessing. And we need never to forget this. We need always to share it, because God gives his promise of guidance. I will instruct you. I will teach you in the way which you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. For those of us as his people, we need to keep in mind that God is with us always. He is indeed Emmanuel, God with us. And we need to keep in mind that his eye is on us and guiding us. Many are the sorrows of the wicked, but he who trusts in the Lord, loving kindness shall surround him. Here is the matter of God's grace. Here is the matter of God's promise of grace, that his loving kindness, his tender mercies will surround us at all times. That whatever that is that has been done, whatever it is that has been basically rebellion against God, which is falling short of the standards, which includes guilt, all of these things can be removed, and there is the presence of the loving kindness of God surrounding that person. And I would suggest that this is why David was so convinced that he could write about this experience. Not only this one, but also the same one in Psalms chapter 51. That probably was the one that was written first, even though we come across this first in our reading. It includes the promise of continuing joy. Be glad in the Lord and rejoice, you righteous ones, and shout for joy, all you who are upright in heart. David knew what it was like not to be upright in heart, and he knew that there was no joy in that life. And that's why we say that the answer is a resounding yes, but at the same time, the answer is a qualified yes. He says, therefore, let everyone who is godly pray to you in a time when you may be found. Surely in a flood of great waters they will not reach him. There comes a time in the life of disobedience when it seems like God is not there. It seems like if one wanted to pray, the prayer would bounce off of the ceiling, and that's the end of the story. To a specifically qualified person, everyone who is godly, pray to you in a time when you may be found. There is a time of need in everyone's life, and it's clear that that time is one of need. And that is the time when one should indeed make all haste to enter into the presence of God, to seek his power, to seek his strength, to seek his grace. And the one who truly trusts in God will do that. And the one that will confess will do that. And the one who confesses will indeed be accepted. But what is most important, not only is the answer a qualified yes, but it is a positive yes. And we see that the answer is supported by a testimony. Notice what David said, when I kept silent about my sin, my body wasted away through my groaning all day long. He was living the life of deceit. If we were to go into 2 Samuel and to read that, there he was as king. The prophet Nathan comes to him and tells about a rich man who basically protected his own sheep by taking the sheep of a poor man and using it to basically be honoring a guest. And David was irate, and Nathan said, "That one is you." And he laid out exactly what he had done. So David knew the life that he was living because he instantly said, "I have sinned." He was living as though he had not sinned, and he was living the life of a hypocrite, pretending to be someone that he was not, pretending to be something that he was not. And we have heard people say how they hate a hypocrite. They won't come to church because of a hypocrite. They need to keep in mind that Jesus has no cotton with a hypocrite either. In fact, when eternity comes, no hypocrite will be with Jesus Christ. So the point is well taken. Be with the hypocrite now or be with him for eternity. But make sure that you're right with the Lord yourself and let the Lord take care of the hypocrite. Notice that David lived this life of deceit, and there were severe consequences. When I kept silent about my sin, my body wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My vitality was drained away as with the fever heat of summer. Notice that God placed his heavy hand upon him. Your hand was heavy upon me, and he could not live under that hand. David's life was totally and adversely affected. When I kept silent about my sin, my body wasted away through my groaning all day long. Nothing could be accomplished, nothing could be done, because he was taken over by the sorrow and the guilt. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. There was not an hour in the 24-hour day that your hand would give me any rest, that would give me any kind of a break. And thus my vitality was drained away, as with the fever heat of summer. His life was totally and adversely affected, and this was the heavy hand of grace. I'll tell you one thing, and you know it for sure yourself. The one thing that we don't want is to have God give us our way when our way is contrary to his will. And notice then that he changed the course of action. I acknowledged my sin to you, and my iniquity I did not hide. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Notice that David completely owned it. He acknowledged his sin. He did not hide his iniquity. He confessed his transgressions. Notice again, I acknowledged my sin, my iniquity. I will confess my transgressions. Notice there was not, well, so-and-so made me do it. I would not have done it except for. There's no qualification, there's no condition. This is what I have done. This is what I must accept in terms of responsibility. I acknowledged my sin to you, missing the mark. He did not hide his guilt. He did not hide his rebellion. And notice that the Lord responded accordingly. He responded graciously. And you forgave the guilt of my sin. It's interesting to live in the 21st century, where there's no such thing as moral standards. Just what you feel to be right is what is right. And yet we can call each other wrong as easily as any generation. There seem to be standards that are there. But notice that in this particular instance, sometimes we hear people say, forgive yourself. I would love to be a bank robber, get wealthy off of robbing banks and never get caught, and then feel guilty one day and say, oh, Don, I forgive you. I did not sin against myself in one sense of the term. I sinned against all those people where I stole their money. But yes, I did sin. But it's difficult to say, I forgive myself. Or it's easy to say, I forgive myself and go on. But whatever way it is, this is not the norm. The norm is we have offended God, And we need to go to God and say, forgive me, for I have sinned against you, and I have sinned against your creatures. And he acknowledged it. And the Lord responded graciously, you forgave my guilt. And if the guilt is forgiven, then also the missing of the mark is forgiven. The rebellion is forgiven. But it was the guilt that basically weighed heavily on his heart. When he changed the course of his action, he enjoyed the blessings of God's forgiveness. Notice that in all of this, he pauses to say, you are my hiding place. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with songs of deliverance. And what we see is what we ask for from God at one time or another or regularly, and that is the protection of his grace. That is the triumph of his power and the joy of living a life that conforms to the will of God. We see exactly the question is, can one who sins so deeply be forgiven and know the blessing of God? The answer is yes, but the answer is also a qualified yes, because there are things that need to be handled between oneself and God, and that basically is confession, and forgiveness follows. We must always remember and we must accept that when God forgives, it is total, it is complete, and it is no more. In Psalms 103, there is that verse that we've known quite well for years. As far as the east is from the west, so far he has removed our transgressions from us. 2 points. Number one, we do not let the guilt of our past influence our presence. Once we stand in the presence of God and we confess that which needs to be confessed, it is removed from us as far as the east is from the west. And the day that we let our own conscience continue to condemn us, we need to remember what John says, that the Lord is greater than our conscience. And the conscience is not always accurate. And when we have dealt with this matter before ourselves and God, it is gone and it is removed as far as the east is from the west. Remember the days of Sunday school when the Sunday school teacher would say, here's the map of the world. Put your hand on the equator and go west. And you go all the way west and you turn around and there you are, back again. And he says, now don't you see? East and west never meet. And we went, wow. And then, of course, came the verse itself. And we must remember and accept the fact that when God forgives, that forgiveness is total and complete. We cannot allow our conscience to condemn us, and shame on the person who basically says, I remember when you did such and so. You're not so good of a Christian after all. That's way out of line. And we must further remember that God's grace can be heavy. When I kept silent about my sin, my body wasted away through my groaning all the day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me, and my vitality was drained away as with the fever heat of summer. In the end, one needs to be thankful for that heavy hand. For if God removed his hand and just left the person as is, notice it would be one of great disaster. Where there is no heavy hand, there is no relationship. In Hebrews chapter 12, the writer says, it is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Notice that if God never disciplines us, we are not a part of the family. The idea is that there will be times in our lives when discipline is necessary, and God is there to mete it out, but only to make us the kind of sons and daughters that we ought to be in the everlasting family. Whether his hand of grace is heavy or light, we need to be glad in the Lord and rejoice always. Be glad in the Lord and rejoice, you righteous ones, and shout for joy, all you who are upright in heart. This is why communion is so important. because it may force us to do what we are a little slack to do from one time unto the next. But let us be sure that we examine ourselves before the Lord, knowing that his hand of grace is on us. It will be heavy sometimes, it will be light on other occasions, but the presence of God's grace is the presence of God in our lives, and for that we give thanks. Our Father, as we come to you in prayer, we thank you for David. We thank you for the way that you used him. We thank you that he willingly laid it out, that we might be instructed, that we might be built up in the faith. And we ask, Father, that as we give some thought now in closing, that we will be the kind of person that is swift to acknowledge to you those things that need to be confessed, to seek your strength, to seek your wisdom, to seek your guidance. In Christ's name we pray, amen.